So I actually sent a copy over to his office just to be like, dude, you might want to get constituent services on this one, right? Because I think he intends to complete a service, to our state. So that's the legislation that happened this week. But my favorite bill from this week is a Ron Gold special. It's called the Weapons Omnibus Bill. And it's about guns. And I thought that was interesting because when a reporter called me to ask about the bill, I said, well, how can there be a guns omnibus bill? Like, we've already taken away all the gun laws in Arizona, right? I mean, like, there aren't any really left. Well, I figured out what's left. It's public buildings, government buildings. So this bill would allow all Arizonans to bring weapons into public buildings. And if the public building wanted to stop the individual from bringing a weapon in, they would have to provide armed security guards at all locations and metal detectors. And if they fail to do so, this is my favorite part, if they fail to do so, the citizen can sue the government for civil and punitive damages. Oh, it gets better. And when they win, the government has 72 hours in which to pay the damages. Now, I wanted to say, as an employee of state government and as a representative of state government, we don't do anything in 72 hours, right? Like, you can maybe get the carpets cleaned in 72 hours, but that's pushing it, right? So it gets even better. If the government doesn't pay the individual who brought their firearm to a state building within 72 hours, that individual gets to commandeer any state or municipal vehicle that they want for their own purposes. So I actually am thinking that the best vehicle to go after is Sheriff Joe's tank, because it's probably the most expensive, right? No, seriously, I mean, if you think about in terms of value, that one has the greatest value. So, yeah, you should do this. That's a real bill. And it's going to get a hearing. It might even pass. So that's where we're facing right now in Arizona, right? So, and let's just put this in context, right? So we're dealing with taking away access from 300,000 people. We're going to have the birther bill. We're going to have the 14th Amendment bill. We're going to have guns in government buildings, or you get to drive Sheriff Joe's tank. And all of those things, I think, are critical to putting our state back on a strong economic path for the future, because they directly impact jobs and job creation in Arizona. So all the individuals in Arizona, who are just over 10% of Arizonans, are jobless right now, and we've got a foreclosure rate that's one of the highest in the nation. Thank goodness for Nevada. I foresee that these types of legislation will have an immediate impact on foreclosure and job loss. And so the good news is that when we see this kind of legislation pass, I think we'll see an immediate increase in folks getting jobs, getting back on their feet, and reclaiming their homes. So Arizona government is serving you. That's what we're here for. And we're doing a great job. Now, there's one thing that the legislature hasn't yet addressed, and that's education. But it's at the top of their priority list. And that's why the state legislature plans to cut $171 million from public universities, $73 million from community colleges, which, by the way, is about 50% of the money that we give to community colleges. So it cuts the community college in half, right? And we know that impacts all of us, right? Particularly in the non-urban parts of the state, community colleges are often the only option for higher education for our younger people and for individuals who are seeking new jobs or working to find a new career. And then an additional about $180 million cut for public education. So while they haven't yet addressed education, know that it's on their agenda, and they're planning to make deep cuts, which I know will result in increased performance by our students and high-tech preparation for tomorrow's economy. Right. Yeah, I know, this is so depressing, isn't it? I think this just gives you a quick picture of what it looks like in the Arizona legislature right now, right? So we are facing one of the greatest crises that our state has ever faced. Indeed, this fiscal crisis is worse in our state than was the Great Depression. Arizona weathered the Great Depression better than we weather this recession. And so the issues that are pressing down on the people of Arizona have never been greater and have never been more serious. And the actions that we take at this time have never been more important. Because at this time, we can choose to restart our economy by creating good jobs, high-wage jobs, sustainable jobs that are accompanied by a high quality of life for Arizonans. We can rebuild our education system so that we have strong, educated students who will be tomorrow's workforce in Arizona. We can become innovative and creative and turn our state around, get back on the right track, and become, as we were before, one of the most rapidly growing, strongest economies in the country. Or we can debate the birther bill. And the choice is very clear. This legislature has chosen an ideological path that does nothing to solve the problems that Arizona faces. So I think that leaves two things for us as Arizonans to do over the next 2 years. Number one, we have to do what you all are already doing, but much, much, much more strong. We must have a much higher decibel in the work that we're doing, and that is the writers group. The writers group is engaging in teaching other people in the community about what's actually happening in Arizona. That we're connecting these failed policies, these ideological extreme policies, to a failed economic agenda. That we're connecting the outrageous acts that they engage in at the Capitol to their failure to invest in a public education system. We have to make that connection for the voters because the legislature is not doing it and the media cannot be counted on to do it. We must do it. So I would encourage each of you to join the 18 individuals who are already part of this writing group and flood all of your local papers, flood all of the blogs, everything you see on the internet. Please flood them with these stories about connecting what is happening at the Capitol to their failure to solve our problems. I'd also encourage you to consider calling into radio stations. And talk radio is huge, particularly in rural Arizona. Call into radio stations and share these examples with folks who are listening, even if they're on the other side of the aisle. One of my favorite things to do is to go on right-wing radio. I love it. I love it. So, well, one, you get some really fun people who call in. But, more importantly, it's an opportunity to present a very pragmatic, practical, common sense view to Arizona's problems. And the interesting thing is some people actually listen. And you actually can change people's minds. So I would encourage you to do that as well. So that's number one. We have to be the truth tellers over the next 2 years to help the people of Arizona see exactly what the choices that were made in November mean on the ground every day in our lives today. That's number one. Number two is to do what you have just finished doing and are probably tired and exhausted from doing. But we have to double down. And that is that we have to ensure that when the next election comes, that the Arizona voter understands exactly the difference between the candidate who is in place now and the candidate who seeks to take that place. We have to make sure that voters understand that your elected senator cares more about the birther bill than creating jobs in northern Arizona. We have to make sure the voter understands that your elected representative cares about undermining the 14th Amendment, not about strengthening public schools. We have to make sure the voter understands that your elected representative cares more about having guns in public buildings than having books in public schools, right? These are the kinds of contrasts that we must draw. Now, the good news is there's plenty of fodder for which to draw it from, because they will continue to bring up these crazy ideas and push them through. And that means that we have to continue to push back against those ideas and send a message of progressivism that we know resonates with the populist people of Arizona. Arizonans don't care about the birther bill or the 14th Amendment or guns. Well, they probably do care about guns in public buildings, but not in the same way that Ron does, right? I don't think it's a good idea to have guns in the Supreme Court. What do you guys think? Right? Yeah. And I'm guessing that the governor probably doesn't want people bringing guns to her office either, right? So we have to help make sure that we're pushing back against those messages of extremism every day with our messages of pragmatic, common sense solutions. Because there's nothing radical about saying that we want good jobs for Arizona families. There's nothing radical about saying that we want public schools so our kids can be good workers tomorrow. There's nothing radical about saying that people should have the right to both feed their family and save up for their kids to go to college, right? Those are common sense ideas. All Americans agree with that. And it's our job to help communicate to the voters that while we all agree with that, their elected officials do not, and it's time for a change. So, will all of you commit to do those two things? Now I know we just handed out like 1 million, it was not 1 million, but it was probably 100 certificates for all of you who already worked so hard. But what I need you to do is to think about today, even though we're quite some time from an election, think about today as if it were a month before the election, right? We have to double down and work every single day, helping ensure that Arizonans understand the choices before them. Because if we don't successfully help Arizonans make better choices in the next election, then I really believe that the future of Arizona will be a legacy of what we see right now. And I know that none of us want to look back in 10 or 20 years, or have our kids or our grandkids look back at Arizona and think, oh, that was the most backward state in the country. We don't want to keep that legacy. And so this is the opportunity for us to turn that around and restore Arizona to what it has always been. A state certainly of rugged individualism, but also a state of mutual respect for each other, for humans, for the land, and an understanding of stewardship, a responsibility to take care of each other and the beautiful land that we are privileged to live on. That is the destiny for Arizona, and we must make it so. Thank you. Oh, sit down. Sit down.
You've got NyQuil if you want to keep going.
Yeah, it wasn't that good. Come on. I have time for some questions, so I'll take them right here.
Yeah, Kyrsten, you mentioned that the media is not going to help. Is there any media outlet within the state that you know of that is sort of willing to put forth information like that? And better yet, any national paper or TV that would do an expose, like that? Because I think if we can get an expose done, like Arizona's already hit the news and like you said around the world, but we still have to keep hitting them like that.
So I'm going to repeat the questions because I'm sure some people in the back didn't hear them. So the question is, if we can't count on the mainstream media, which I have said, to tell us all this, what can we do instead and who can we go to? So first let me say, the mainstream media is not equipped to handle this kind of information. Corporations, major corporations own media like the Arizona Republic, and they, over the years, have totally restricted the ability for journalists to do their job, which is to research, do some muckraking, and then expose. They get no money and no ability to do that. So most journalists show up to work, listen to a couple quotes, write it down, and put in their story. And I want to be clear, it's not the journalist's fault. It is, however, an issue of corporate ownership, that there's these behemoth corporations that own almost all of media. There is one outlet in Central Phoenix that I think provides better details and information about what's happening at the Capitol. It's a group called the Arizona Guardian, but it is subscription only. It's an online newspaper, and it's subscription only, and it's pretty expensive. So my suggestion would be, is if you decide to do that, you're putting this on YouTube. I'm not going to say it. Okay, so think creatively about how to get access to the Arizona Guardian. And share that information with other individuals, because the Guardian probably does a better job than any other publication giving you the inside details on what's happening at the legislature. And that's because it's a privately owned enterprise. The journalists who write it own it. And that's how they get more time to do good stories. In terms of national news, I'll be honest, there's not really much. The New York Times editorial page has been trying to deal with the immigration issue for a couple years now, and there is one editorial writer there who I think is doing a good job. He doesn't get printed as often as he'd like. His editorials always get cut down, and as he told me on the phone 3 days ago when we talked, the New York Times has Arizona fatigue. And I said to him, well, so do we, right? And we need your help. So I don't think we're going to see the kind of help we need from a national news outlet. The best way to help change what's happening in the media is to become it yourself. So start infiltrating the media by letters to the editor, calling into radio shows, even see if someone can get a column in the local paper. I mean, see what you can do to become a part of the noise that's happening so that there's more than one perspective being shared. Yes.